So I was browsing YouTube the other day when I saw something that I could not believe happened. After years of denying it, PragerU has not only admitted the existence of systemic racism, but also come up with a solution to it. I have to see this. So I eagerly clicked the video and, well, given I'm commentating on it, you can guess how good I thought it was.
There is systemic racism in this country.
Here's a cookie. It might be a little moldy, but that's because I expected to be giving this to you a decade ago.
And people of color are paying a terrible price because of it.
Except for in Alaska and Hawaii, apparently, as they are not included in this graphic.
Here's how bad it is. At Columbia University, black students have a separate graduation from white students.
Now, in my last video on PragerU, I mentioned that you can go to their website and see all of their sources, and I have made sure to do so with every claim in this video. And let me just say, you don't even need to check their sources to find out the video is being misleading on this. Here's the corresponding source for that on their facts and sources page. Columbia's March 2021 announcement read in part, quote, "In honor of Columbia's diverse student community and complementing the school and university-wide graduation ceremonies, we are proud to also offer multicultural graduation celebrations, which provide a more intimate setting for students who self-identify in a variety of ways." It should also be noted that it wasn't only black people who had this offer. LGBT students, as well as Asian, Native American, and first-generation immigrant students were also offered their own graduation ceremonies. Best as I can tell, this was nothing more than an option, and there was nothing stopping a student in any of those communities from attending the normal graduation. Or hell, there's nothing stopping any student from just not attending graduation. That's not a requirement.
In many other colleges, black students are encouraged to live in their own separate dorms.
Yeah, this is another example of them being incredibly misleading for essentially the exact same reason. To quote from their source page once again, "In many colleges in the US, black students are encouraged to live in their own separate dorms. The National Association of Scholars found that of the 173 schools they surveyed, quote, 42% offer segregated residences, 46% offer segregated orientation programs, and 72% hold segregated graduation ceremonies? Then why did you guys just single out Columbia University for doing that one sentence ago? Also, what do PragerU and the National Association of Scholars mean when they say encouraged? Were black students threatened with lower grades or higher tuition if they didn't go to the black-only dorms? Again, this appears to be nothing more than an option certain students have, so what exactly is the big issue here?
Students in many New York City government schools are separated by color during the school year.
Okay, their source for this is a New York Post article with the headline, "Manhattan School." Notice how it only says one school, by the way, while the PragerU video said many, "to sort kids by race during social justice discussions." A Manhattan junior high school, again, notice the fact that the article is very clearly only saying one school is doing this, plans to racially separate students while discussing identity and social justice topics next week, the Post has learned. Honestly, this reminds me much more of those days during health classes or sex ed classes where they would take all the boys or girls out so one specific gender could ask particularly sensitive or embarrassing questions without people of the other gender listening.
The next class, they put the girls and the guys in separate rooms, and a female counselor talks to us about body image.
What do they talk to the boys about?
A classroom full of guys and a male teacher?
Nocturnal emissions.
Then the second coming of Jim Crow.
State governments put regulations in place that make it harder for minorities to start businesses.
Their source for this is a 2015 testimony, Harry Alford of the National Black Chamber of Commerce, because although black people should not have access to their own separate dormitories, they should have their own separate Chamber of Commerce, gave to Congress. The testimony is about environmental regulations, with Alfred arguing that they disproportionately harm people who are poor and who live in urban areas, which is a large amount of the black population. Oh, also, they reference a study that they did in June 2015, but when I clicked the URL, it just took me to their homepage. Oh, also, the National Black Chamber of Commerce has been caught multiple times taking donations from people like ExxonMobil and Chevron. Just wanted to put that out there. They received donations from the fossil fuel industry and then make arguments that environmental regulations are racist. My point is, this seems like an incredibly biased source.
A national museum declares hard work and ambition to be white values.
I already talked about this controversy in one of the parts of my Mr. Enter commentary, but I have an additional point to make regarding her telling of this specifically. The picture the Smithsonian made mentions hard work in reference to the Protestant work ethic, which was developed by Puritans who came to what is now the United States in the early 17th century. These same Puritans were also the people who first brought African slaves to the United States. The Smithsonian isn't saying that only white people can engage in hard work, but that hard work, as we think of it in the United States, is a concept that was thought up by white people, which is objectively true.
One of America's two major political parties assumes that many black people are incapable of obtaining a driver's license or an ID card.
Their source for this one is a 2021 USA Today op-ed by Ken Blackwell, the former Ohio Secretary of Treasury and Secretary of State. And he never quotes a single Democrat saying that.
In Oregon, black students are told that math is a white construct.
This is the article they cite. Spoiler alert, it doesn't fucking say that. What actually happened was the Oregon Department of Education offered teachers a chance to attend a virtual micro course ran by a group called A Pathway to Equitable Math Instruction, which argued that certain aspects of teaching math, not math by itself, were rooted in white supremacy. The article also never said that teachers had to make any changes to their instruction based off of this micro course, just so you all know.
All but guaranteeing failure in this essential skill.
How? Even giving you the benefit of the doubt and assuming that straw man version of the story was true, just because black people are told something is a white construct, that doesn't mean they can't therefore succeed at it. That just doesn't follow.
In Oakland, no student is allowed to get a D or an F. Instead, everyone is simply promoted to the next grade whether they know the material or not.
Again, let's just read a single paragraph from the article PragerU cites. Los Angeles Unified, Sacramento City Unified, and other districts, don't know why they singled out Oakland in the PragerU video, but they did, are considering, meaning they haven't done this yet, so PragerU saying no student is allowed to as if they already are doing this is completely inaccurate. Phasing out grades below a C for high school students. If a student fails a test or doesn't complete their homework, they'll be able to retake the test and get more time to turn in assignments. The idea is to encourage students to learn the course material and not be derailed by a low grade that could potentially disqualify them from admission to the University of California and California State University. Students who don't know the material, pass the final exam, or finish homework by the end of the semester would earn an incomplete, meaning they wouldn't just be moved on automatically like the PragerU video said they would.
City councils demonize their own police departments, then vote to cut police budgets. Crime and murder skyrocket. The victims are almost all minorities.
Okay, this might be a nitpick, but the article they cite actually says that politicians are increasing police funding in response to rising crime, not that crime rose as a result of budget cuts.
That's only a few of many examples. It's shocking, but commonplace. Every day in every major city, people of color are living in this oppressive, patronizing environment. These prejudices, literally prejudgments, make it more and more difficult for black people and other minorities to improve their lives.
Okay, a grand total of one thing listed by PragerU so far could be counted as a prejudice, which is the idea that black people are too stupid to get IDs, which, again, they couldn't actually provide an example of anybody saying.
The the very opposite of what the goal should be. In other words, the very people claiming to have Black people's and minorities' best interest at heart are instituting the very policies and attitudes that are holding them back.
Okay, I get the point is supposed to be irony, but everybody claims to have Black people's best interest at heart. During segregation, the White Citizens Council claimed they had Black people's best interest at heart, arguing that it was actually better for Black people if we kept Jim Crow laws in place. It wasn't irony, it was attempting to make their ideas more palatable.
It's the ideology of the left that has set back young students of color with lower education standards, that calls for pulling cops out of high-crime areas and replacing them with social workers.
Hey, did you guys know that modern policing has its roots in slave catchers? Just thought that was kind of interesting.
That states that skin color is more important than character, more important than anything.
Really? Because I'm somebody who's on the woke left. Side note, I like how the term woke has become an insult. What are you politically? Asleep? And I don't believe that under any stretch of the imagination. For example, I'm not judging you based off your skin color when I call you an idiot and a liar for this video. I would say that no matter what race you are, because I have evidence to both of those claims.
Yes, it is the woke left that is systemically racist, not America. The race hoax epidemic is proof. There have been dozens of these hoaxes over the last few years. Nooses on garages, the N-word on dorm rooms, this is MAGA country taunts on cold city streets. Virtually every one of them has been faked. The demand for racism exceeds the supply. If racism against Black people or any other minority group was rampant, you wouldn't have to fake it to convince people how bad things are.
Oh my god, I can't believe I have to say this. People don't fake hate crimes to win arguments about systemic racism. They fake hate crimes primarily for attention.
Did anyone fake racism in the South in the 1950s?
I don't know about in the 1950s, but I do know of at least one example of fake racism in the 1890s. Here's YouTuber Mr. Beat explaining it.
New Orleans, Louisiana, June 7th, 1892. Homer Plessy buys a first-class ticket and boards a train headed to Covington. He sits in a vacant seat in a whites-only train car. You wouldn't think Plessy would draw any attention since he was 7/8 white and 1/8 black. There are no known pictures of Homer Plessy, but historic records describe him as a white man. And yet, the conductor knew that he was 1/8 black, and he told Plessy he had to get up and move to the blacks-only car. After Plessy refused to leave his seat, almost immediately, a detective named Christopher Kane came over and arrested him. Now, wait a second. How did this detective dude know Plessy was 1/8 black? Well, this was all planned. Plessy was acting on behalf of a civil rights group called the Citizens Committee. They had carefully planned for this moment to protest the Separate Car Act, a law recently passed by the Louisiana legislature that required, quote, equal but separate train cars for blacks and whites, and defined what it meant to be, quote, black and, quote, white. So get this. The Citizens Committee not only let the railroad company know ahead of time of Plessy boarding, but they also hired that private detective I mentioned, Christopher Kane, to make sure he arrested him for breaking the Separate Car Act and not vagrancy or some other crime. The railroad company, by the way, also hated the Separate Car Act because it meant they had to spend more money on additional train cars, so it cut into their profits.
And yes, this is the same Plessy of Plessy v. Ferguson fame. The fact is, there have always been people who are willing to fake racism, either to get themselves attention or to make a political point in this case. I'm sure in the Jim Crow South this occasionally happened. However, the examples of actual racism were so numerous that they're just incredibly hard to find.
That's not to say racism doesn't exist. Of course it does. There will always be small-minded people, but their numbers are as small as their minds. And in case you're thinking of George Floyd, please know that even Minnesota's leftist attorney general admitted the incident had nothing to do with Floyd being black.
Okay, first off, this is the only claim from the video that PragerU does not back up with a source on their website, so I'm not even going to address it, But I like how they just call him Minnesota's Attorney General. He has a name, you know, Keith Ellison. I like to think his name wasn't said because then people might Google Keith Ellison Prager, which would not be a good thing for Dennis Prager, the man behind PragerU. For those who don't know, in 2006, Keith Ellison became the first Muslim ever elected to Congress and said he was going to take his oath of office on the Quran. Dennis did not like this. Here's an excerpt from his November 2006 column on the topic. Keith Ellison, Democrat of Minnesota, the first Muslim elected to the United States Congress, has announced that he will not take his oath of office on the Bible, but on the Bible of Islam. What's up with this wording? Why not just say the Holy Book of Islam? Why the Bible of Islam? The Quran. He should not be allowed to do so, not because of any American hostility towards the Quran, but because the act undermines American civilization. We don't have hostility towards the thing that undermines our civilization, apparently. Dennis ends the column by writing, "When all elected officials take their oaths of office with their hands on the very same book, they all affirm that some unifying value system underlines American civilization." Actually, the entire point of having a large House of Representatives is to prevent unity, specifically unity among those who want to oppress others, from gaining a sizable majority. Dennis would know this if he ever actually read the Federalist Papers. If Keith Ellison is allowed to change that, he will be doing more damage to the unity of America and to the value system that has formed this country than the terrorists of 9/11. It is hard to believe this is the legacy most Muslim Americans want to bequeath to America. But if it is not only Europe that is in trouble.
But it's time to ask yourself some questions. Is it really helping Black people to tell them they're not as responsible for their actions as anyone else? Isn't it condescending, if not outright bigoted, to expect less from somebody purely based on their race? Isn't it clear that we should judge each person on their merits, not their skin color? Wouldn't that do more to create an equitable society than 100 government programs?
I do all of those in my personal life, and I have never met anyone on the woke left who didn't. Honestly, that's all I want to cover. So, final thoughts? Well, this video is PragerU accusing people of being racist while lying and not giving examples. So, I think they should take their own advice when they said this.
The demand for racism exceeds the supply. If racism against Black people or any other minority group was rampant, you wouldn't have to fake it to convince people how bad things are. Did anyone fake racism in the South in the 1950s?